The Chinese are not trying to convert anybody at all. But what the Chinese have done is that clearly they have to, when they create a political system for China, the one big lesson that the Chinese people have learned after 4,000 years is that when you have chaos, everybody suffers. And when you have strong central government, everybody benefits. And from the Chinese people's point of view, the last 40 years of human and social development in China have been the best 40 years in 4,000 years of Chinese history.
马凯硕在访谈中扔出了一个让西方精英坐立难安的秘密：与中国相处其实非常容易。他说，中国人是世界上最理性、最务实的谈判者，只要你不碰他们的核心利益，不干涉内政，他们比谁都好打交道。但西方偏偏选择了妖魔化，媒体铺天盖地炒作债务陷阱，仿佛全球南方国家都是任人宰割的傻瓜。结果呢？145个国家用脚投票加入了一带一路，这不是外交博弈的失败，这是西方认知体系正在崩塌的信号。下面来看看马凯硕精彩的对话。
Yeah, I mean, this is why I want to turn to China, because again, isn't this a relationship that Europe and America are potentially getting catastrophically wrong? You have a world which is engaging with China and China investing in much of that world. And you have Europe and America that sees this as a threat and doesn't really know what kind of relationship to try and forge with China. What do you think it should be doing?
Well, I'm going to give away a huge secret. It is actually very easy to get along with China. Because the Chinese, at the end of the day, are among the most pragmatic, rational, careful, calculating players on the world stage. You can sit down and make a deal with China as long as you understand and respect what their core interests are and what they clearly want to make sure they don't interfere in any way, for example, in their internal affairs. And then they say, okay, you don't interfere in my internal affairs. I won't interfere in your internal affairs. And let's find ways and means of getting along. And it's important to understand, I mean, everyone, the Western media demonizes China. I'll just give you a simple example. When China launches Belt and Road Initiative and said, okay, let's work together to help build infrastructure in your countries, immediately the Anglo-Saxon media brilliantly said, oh, watch out, China is creating a debt trap for you. And if you're not careful, you'll be indebted to China and you'll be overtaken by China. I mean, for a start, that statement was an insult to the intelligence of the countries of the global south. They're so weak and stupid, they don't know what's good for them. But despite the massive Anglo-Saxon media campaign against the Belt and Road Initiative, over 145 countries applied to join the Belt and Road Initiative, showing basically that most of the world outside the West knows exactly how to get along with China. And by the way, this doesn't mean you kowtow to China, but you can work with China and you treat it with respect, and the Chinese will treat you with respect. And the vast majority of countries in the world have no problems working with China.
But do you think there is a sort of a rivalry of civilization between China and the West, or is that kind of irrelevant?
I find it astonishing that Western minds expect that a civilization, which is the world's oldest continuous civilization, Chinese civilization, as it succeeds and modernizes, will become culturally a clone of the West. China will never become a replica of the West. And by the way, I'll give you another secret. Neither will India become a replica of the West. It may share some of the political structures of the West, but culturally, it is also not going to become a clone of the West. And I think the fundamental problem in the world today is that the Western mind cannot conceive of a world where you have many different successful, thriving civilizations living side by side, and they're not going to become like you. And I can also, by the way, give you 100% guarantee that Islamic civilization will never become westernized. So at the end of the day, it's time for the Western mind to wake up and accept the new reality of a very different world in the 21st century.
Yes, but do you think these cultures can coexist, blend? You know, can we all get along economically while different aspects of our political and a non-political culture, in some way sort of blend and overlap?
Let me give you some good news for a change. There is in the world a multi-civilizational laboratory. It's a part of the world where among 700 million people, there are 250 million Muslims, 150 million Christians, 150 million Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhists, Hinayana Buddhists, and you have Taoists, Confucianists, Hindus, and lots of communists too. And that part of the world is Southeast Asia. Now, if you really believe that all these religions and civilizations can't get along with each other, ASEAN or Southeast Asia should be seeing continuous conflict between the different cultures and civilizations. Instead, ASEAN has become an oasis of peace. Yeah, we have skirmishes from time to time between Thailand and Cambodia or the borders of Myanmar, but by and large, we have had no major wars in Southeast Asia. So I can tell you this, the Western mind has got to accept and treat other civilizations with respect rather than with condescension, and to stop believing that we reach the end of history and that the rest of the world is going to become like the West. Because if only Francis Fukuyama had changed one word in the title of his essay and called it the return of history, then he would have got it dead right.
Yes, I don't think even Fukuyama thinks the end of history was right now, does he? But you're sort of, are you sort of painting over though the inevitable tensions that remain in the East, or are these things that will be ironed out as well? I mean, if you think about conflict in Cambodia, the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, ongoing conflict between China, India, and Pakistan. That flares up every so often over random bits of, mountain territory. They're not getting everything right.
You're absolutely right. The world is sadly an imperfect place, and there will always continue to be problems, bilateral problems. But the question is, how do you manage them? And the big genius for most of Asia, leaving aside West Asia and the Middle East, is that there have been no major wars in East Asia. I mean, yes, there have been skirmishes within India and Pakistan, between Thailand and Cambodia, and then maybe between Philippines and China in the South China Sea, but no all-out war. And that's actually very, very important, because at the end of the day, among Asians, there is a very pragmatic culture which says, hey, we are different, but we have to get along. We'll treat each other with respect and find ways and means of getting along with each other. And that's why basically the Asian region is going dramatically. I mean, just to give you one statistic to illustrate how the world is changing, in the year 2000, when the 21st century opened, the entire GNP of the European Union combined was 8 times bigger than China. Today, they are about the same size. And by 2050, Europe will be half the size of China, right? These are the fundamental structural changes that are happening within Asia. And I think that's what we have to deal with, a very, very different world. And I would encourage basically, and I know this is very difficult, I would encourage a little bit more humility by the Europeans, because when you look at the statements made by Elizabeth von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission. There's a head that they made by Kaja Kallas, who's like the foreign minister of the European Union. They make these remarkably condescending statements about China. And the rest of the world looks at them with great astonishment and say, gosh, who do you think you are? How dare you make condescending statements about a civilization that is, 4,000 years old? And that's why you notice that the countries outside the West never repeat the kind of condescending statements that the West makes about China. So the problem doesn't lie out there, it lies with the West.
Do you think we're seeing a change, though? I mean, we recently saw Keir Starmer go to China, and there was much less of the trying to lecture China about human rights and political systems than we've seen in the past. And there's sort of an acceptance that China, you can't try to tell big countries how to live anymore. And I wonder what this means for democracy around the world and whether democracy is under threat.
Well, let me make 2 points. First, I want to emphasize I'm a friend of the United Kingdom. And when I was a young diplomat, I learned so much about diplomacy from my elderly British diplomatic friends because they taught me a lot. And Britain was known for its diplomatic finesse. But in the last 25 years, vis-a-vis China, UK has been vacillating from one extreme to the other, from Cameron and Osborne trying to beat a new path to China and build a new relationship, and then there comes along Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and they make these remarkably condescending, dismissive statements about China. That was not what the UK was known for. So I think if you want to build on the recent visit by Sir Keir Starmer to Beijing, please at least have a certain level of consistency in your foreign policy towards China that will go beyond whether it's a Labour government or Conservative government or a Nigel Farage government hitting UK. Now, the second point I make is that democracy is not under threat at all. But China does not believe that either its political system or its culture is meant for export to the rest of the world. As you know, this is the exact opposite of the United States. The United States believes that anybody can be an American, and that's wonderful, frankly. Lots of people around the world, many good friends of mine have gone to the United States and succeed. And that's a wonderful thing about American society. But if I'm an ethnic Indian, if I go to China tomorrow and say, I want to be Chinese, the Chinese will look at me and say, what's wrong with this guy? He's not Chinese. And he cannot become Chinese. The Chinese are not trying to convert anybody at all. But what the Chinese have done is that clearly they have to, when they create a political system for China, the one big lesson that the Chinese people have learned after 4,000 years is that when you have chaos, everybody suffers. And when you have strong central government, everybody benefits. And from the Chinese people's point of view, the last 40 years of human and social development in China have been the best 40 years in 4,000 years of Chinese history. I know the Western media keeps asking, when are the Chinese people going to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party? And the Chinese people think, gosh, we must be very stupid if you're going to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party when our lives have improved so much. So that the legitimacy that the Chinese Communist Party enjoys in the eyes of the Chinese people is very strong and very real, even though they don't have a democracy. And by the way, if they do have a bad ruler who loses the mandate of heaven, Chinese history has also shown how they remove the empress.
I suppose what I mean is not so much the democracy is under threat from China, but democracy is under threat from itself. It's failing in all sorts of different countries. It is failing to change lives, and people are turning on traditional political structures. Old party systems are breaking down. So whether it's in America or Europe, the rise of populism, these are the threats to democracy that people perceive. And what you seem to be saying is actually this desire and thrust for strong government that can do the things that weak democracies struggle to do may be a good thing.
Well, I can tell you, you're absolutely right. Democracies are facing challenges, but I think you have to make it clear that the problem of democracy in the United States of America is very different from the problem of democracy, let's say, in the UK or in Europe. The fundamental problem in the United States is that it has become a plutocracy. And this is what Martin Wolf, Paul Volcker, Joseph Stiglitz have all said. And money essentially, sadly, decides the ultimate public policy decisions in the United States of America. Now, that's a very deep structural problem in the United States, which the American people will have to sort out. Now, in the case of Europe, it is not true that money has overtaken European society, although I must say, if you want to know what's the metaphysical message of the Epstein files, the metaphysical message of the Epstein files is that the elites, political elite, business elite, big money elite, are very cozily tied to each other also, but not in the way of the United States. And so I think each society has got to examine what are the specific challenges to their democracy and deal with them. And I must emphasize also, like if you take Denmark, for example, frankly, there's nothing wrong with Denmark's democracy. It's functioning very well. Thank you very much. And if you look at Australia's democracy, nothing is wrong with Australia's democracy. And maybe one reason for that is that they have compulsory voting. So it is not the case that all democracies are failing, but democracy is not a silver bullet that can cure everything. Democracy actually is a wild animal. And when you ride that wild animal, you got to tame it. Because if you don't, you get all kinds of amazing things emerging in democratic polities. And by the way, the person who warned us about this happened to be Plato over 2,000 years ago.
深入分析这场对话，处处是刺穿西方傲慢的剧烈反差。最致命的是文明克隆的幻觉，西方真诚地相信，一个拥有4000年连续历史的文明，在现代化后必然会变成西方的复制品。马凯硕直言，中国永远不会成为西方的克隆，印度不会，伊斯兰文明更不会。东南亚就是活生生的反正，7亿人口，穆斯林、基督徒、佛教徒、印度教徒、共产主义者杂居，按西方逻辑早就该打翻天，但东盟却成了和平绿洲，过去几十年没有大规模战争。更狠的反差在制度输出上。马凯硕指出，中国从不试图把自身体制包装成普世价值强加于人。一个印度人明天说我要做中国人，中国人会觉得他疯了，但美国真诚地相信任何人都可以，都应该变成美国人。这种不输出的自信，恰恰构成了对美国传教世事外交的辛辣讽刺。关于民主，马凯硕的论断同样冷酷，民主面临的威胁根本不是中国，而是民主自身。美国已沦为富豪统治，金钱决定公共政策。欧洲政客的傲慢言论让全世界震惊。他提醒，丹麦和澳大利亚的民主运转良好，但民主不是万能药，更不是银弹。2000多年前，柏拉图就警告过，民主是一头野兽，需要驯服。马凯硕总结道，世界正在经历历史的回归，而非历史的终结。当西方终于放下文明优越感，学会用尊重而非居高临下的姿态面对中国时，才会发现21世纪不是西方文明的独角戏，而是多文明共存的宏大交响。问题是，西方